from Virginia. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I appreciate it. Here's the dilemma that we have. In my district, which is financially stressed in many parts of it, I represent 29 jurisdictions in rural Southwest, always put the pause in there, Virginia. So when ACA came in, so many of my people immediately came to me, long before the Trump administration came in, and in their minds the ACA was junk insurance. Because when they were promised that their premiums would go down, they now had premiums that were financially crippling. When they were promised that they would have better access, they now found that they had high deductibles. And they now found that their copays had gone through the roof. So there is no question, I've never argued, that the pre-existing condition was a problem that should have been dealt with long before the ACA. And I understand the concerns and the frustration that people had who had pre-existing conditions. And we need to take care of that, and we will take care of that. I don't see anybody who would argue at this point that we shouldn't deal with people with pre-existing conditions and make sure they have access to affordable health care, which is why I supported our attempts to get an amendment put in on day one of this Congress that would say get the committees of jurisdiction. In fact, it referenced the Energy and Commerce Committee, this committee, and the Ways and Means Committee to report out a bill that took care of all the concerns we've heard today and said it guarantees no American citizen can be denied health insurance coverage as the result of a previous illness or health status, and guarantees no American citizen can be charged higher premiums or cost sharing as the result of a previous illness or health status, thus ensuring affordable health coverage for those with pre-existing conditions. That's where we are. That's what we stand for. So, you know, I find it interesting that this debate has become, you know, I'm hearing about junk insurance and how, you know, Republicans are evil, that they want junk insurance. I hear it on a regular basis that my people think that what they've got now is junk and it's all they can afford and it's costing them a fortune. So, Mr. Roy, what do you have to say about that?
I've found the conversation we've been having about so-called junk insurance interesting because nobody seems to be asking the question as to why people are voluntarily buying so-called junk insurance. They're buying it because the premiums are half or a third or a quarter of what the premiums are for
and
Affordable
if you
Care Act
can't
plans.
afford something else, you're going to buy something that you can't afford. Isn't that correct?
100%. So a plan that has all the bells and whistles but is unaffordable to you is effectively worthless, whereas a plan that may not have all the bells and whistles but at least provides you some coverage is. And the great tragedy of the Affordable Care Act is that we did not have to have that dichotomy. We could have had plans that had robust coverage for people with pre-existing conditions and protections for people regardless of health status, and yet we're still affordable. I've outlined it both in my written testimony, my oral testimony, and many, many other documents that I've presented to this committee in the past, how we could achieve that.
Now, you would agree with me, for those people who may have bought the junk insurance without knowing what they were getting into, that we probably ought to pass something that says that the things that aren't going to be covered, if you're only getting $20,000 worth of care and then you have to take the full bill after that, as Ms. Castor talked about, we should have that in bold language on the front of the policy. You would agree that we should put some consumer protection in that, make sure there's transparency so people are well advised of what they're getting or not getting. Isn't that true?
I have no problem with robust disclosure about what's in a short-term limited duration plan versus an ACA compliant plan. To a degree, we already have that. In a sense, if you're buying off the ACA plan, I think most consumers know that those plans have fewer protections, but more disclosure and more clarity in disclosure would be a good thing.
Absolutely. I agree with that. You know, what's interesting is everybody seems to have gone after Judge O'Connor. I don't know him. I haven't studied his opinions. But I do find this interesting, and I thought it was the right thing to do. He put a stay on his ruling so it didn't create a national catastrophe or suddenly people having to scramble to figure out what to do. Mr. Miller, isn't that a little unusual in this day? When, I mean, people have accused him of being biased or having a political bent and using his power, but I seem to recall all kinds of opinions by judges that I thought were coming from a slightly different philosophical bent, but who went out there on a limb, pushed the envelope of the law, but instead of saying, now let's wait until the appeal's over and make sure this is right before we affect the average citizen, they just let it go into effect. But Judge O'Connor said, nope, in case this is overturned, I want to make sure nobody's adversely impacted and put a stay on his own ruling. Isn't that unusual, and wasn't that the right thing to do?
No, it's not. It's hopscotch. We've had some federal judges who have had nationwide injunctions reaching way beyond what you would think would be the normal process.
Yeah.
I think all the
I've
parties
noticed that.
understood what practically was going on here. I would just point out on the legalities of this, just to clean up the record. one of
Just
the
summarize
things
very
about the-
quickly, because
My
your time's up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead. If you could summarize, she said.
I'll just say
Quickly.
real fast, we left out the argument about tax guardrails, which was in Chief Justice Roberts' opinion, and Sy is exaggerating what is there and isn't there. The problem is that when you take it apart, there's nothing left behind. Because
Okay,
his test for
I
what's
think
in
your time's
tax
expired.
Didn't exist anymore.